everyone. My name is Anupa and I'm from the Role Model Rebels. Today we have a very special guest and one of our role models, Alexandra Nicorici, founder of Out of the Ordinary, a Web3 marketing podcast. We'll be speaking about a lot of things today. So over to you, Alexandra. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to be recording this session with you today.
So let me start with a few questions. The Out of the Ordinary is gaining a lot of momentum, with the fantastic lineup of speakers and the delivery. How did you come up with it, and what made you decide? Actually, we've also never spoken about this. I'm really interested to know.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's actually a pretty funny and sad story at the same time. Long story short, just to give you a bit of my background, I've been working with early stage tech startups all my life. I'm originally from Romania, but I lived abroad and worked with companies from abroad pretty much in the last 10 years. And I ended up, after a huge burnout, I landed a job in 2020 for a home renting app. Nobody was moving anymore because 2 weeks in my job, COVID hit, everybody was closed. A year and a half later, we raised €1 million in 2.5 hours. It was absolutely insane. So after a year and a half, I said, I just can't do it anymore. And I ended up in Web3 totally by mistake. There was a friend of a friend of a friend that was building something. So I said initially, well, I know nothing about the industry. So let me maybe I can help you with stuff that I already know. And then we'll figure it out, take it from here, see if it's any match for a longer term. This was supposed to be for me a 2-month job. Then they moved the entire team to Barcelona. Then I said, okay, maybe I can move with you and so on. So I've done a lot of things in a very short period of time. And
Sounds very active.
it was pretty insane, actually, yes. And then I moved back to Bucharest. And in the summer of 2022, so 2 years ago almost, the bear market in crypto started, but it wasn't you couldn't feel it quite a lot yet. And I said, okay, well, I think it would be interesting to stay in the industry, right? I've invested so much, in the last 6 months at least, almost a year actually. So maybe it's interesting to actually dig deeper. And what happened was that I was applying for a lot of jobs. I was having a lot of interviews left and right, but nothing was sticking because the bear market was getting deeper and deeper. All the situations the Luna crash happened that summer as well. Then it was followed up with what happened with FTX. If anybody has been reading the news, they've heard of it. So
it's hard to miss.
Yeah, and everybody they were just closing the roles. And I was there 3 months interviewing with the same company and so on. And it was very, very hurtful, right? I never knew exactly where I am in this field. Therefore, what I did, I said, okay, I'm just gonna start the pod. I joined Shify, which is the biggest women-led community in the Web3 space. They have an amazing education program as well. So I said, okay, I'm gonna be doing all these small things just to make sure that, or to prove that I have more skin in the game than what people have been telling me, because that was the main issue. I got a lot of feedback many times saying you don't have enough skin in the game. Now it does make a lot more sense for me why they were saying that. And it wasn't because I didn't have enough skin in the game, just to get this right. But I said, okay, where do I learn marketing? And zero resources. So I said, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. I was already connecting to a lot of people on Twitter and LinkedIn, mostly LinkedIn at that time. So I said, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. I've never done podcasting before. So maybe this is going to help me land the job. I'm going to get 3 episodes out. Everybody is going to think I'm so smart and they're going to hire me. Well, a year and a half later, this did not happen. However, I think this podcast was one of the best decisions that I've made, mostly because it gave me so much momentum. It helped me build my brand. It helped me be in front of people that I've never thought I could be in front of. It opened so many doors for me. For example, just to give an example, I went to Paris 2 weeks ago for NFT Paris. And just because of this podcast, I was able to do a giveaway of 15 tickets, which were worth like around 7,500 euros. This is insane. I not even in my biggest dreams I would have thought this happens. Obviously, it's still pretty early stage, let's say. As of now, though, even if there were like some attempts before, right now, Out of Ordinary is the only Web3 marketing podcast out there, which is a good and a bad thing at the same time. Good because there's no competition, and of course, I can say this like I'm running the only Web3 marketing podcast out
No,
there.
but that's commendable, to be self-driven, self-learned also in this genre, and then to bring it
Sure.
forward. I think there's a lot of education and success in that.
There's a steep learning curve, but I think like for a marketer, it's always so exciting to be learning new things, right? That's why, and what I wanted to say is that it's bad because competition makes you better and competition drives audience. And like the second point is the most important thing. Obviously, like there is an audience right now, and I think with the bull market coming up,
Yeah,
or like starting, Bitcoin is already at 72K.
yeah,
Um, so I think a lot more interest is going to be fostered around the subject.
yeah.
Um, and I'm only so excited to see like where it's going to take me from here and where it's going to take the community actually, because like I'm not building it only for myself. Obviously, it's an amazing learning curve for me, like podcasting in general or growing this community and so on, but at the same time, like Web3 marketing in general. But at the same time, I think it's such a great learning for others as well to come on the pod and always hopefully get some of their answers, their questions answered.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Like I was going through your, the diverse array of topics from, let's say, community, marketing, loyalty programs, algorithm. So how do you, so I would want to break this set of questions in terms of how do you select your speakers? Because to the community that you're driving or looking for, because, still today we have people who are beginners, intermediate, to experts. And what is the kind of strategy to delivery that you're using for somebody who's going to be starting up a podcast? So, yeah, so if you could just explore that and let us know.
So, I think something I wanted to mention here, just to make sure I'm not forgetting, especially because we're doing this recording for the Role Models Rebels.
Yeah,
I think women's role in this industry and in general in tech is so important. And having a woman putting her voice on something like this and driving the conversation there is also huge. Also, I was actually talking to somebody who was like on my podcast recently, and he was like, well, he puts a lot of content out there, like marketing wise. And he said, well, actually, it's very curious. Like, I'm very curious to see like who's your audience, because like the majority of the other people that are on my podcast, they are like 90 something, 97% men. And it took me a while to understand. It's like, well, I'm like, well, in my case, sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 40-60, but it's like I do get a lot of women as well. And like a lot of women slide into my DMs to tell me like, oh my God, you're doing an amazing job. I've been following you for this long and so on. So I think this is like having this voice, like a female voice, and like be more diverse instead of like me just talking about games or NFTs. That's super important.
yeah,
And I think this kind of drives the conversation to what you were asking about subjects. Because in the last year, it's been work in progress, right? I invited people to come on the podcast that either there were people that I knew, people that were pitched to me. I'm getting a lot of pitches of people wanting to come on the podcast and talk about like different subjects. So it was a very good test to really understand like what the biggest impact, what people would like to see more. And I'm seeing some trends now. They're not 100% where I would like them to see, but I'm seeing some trends. It's exactly what you were mentioning, anything related to like case studies, loyalty programs, things are being explained in easier terms. I think this is what drives the biggest conversation. I'm also having sometimes, I've had this one episode with somebody who spoke about film 3. So like cinema and like funding, artists, like they're doing videos or like films with the power of Web3, with donations in crypto and so on, and putting everything on blockchain and so on. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be like one of the most boring episodes. Like it wasn't boring, but I don't think it's going to drive any traffic. And actually, it's right now, it's like, I think it's in like top 5 or something, which is pretty insane. It's like, you never know what's going to stick. That's what I wanted to say. And the lesson that, or like the suggestion that I would have for somebody in that wants to start a podcast, probably is to figure out like what would be very important for them to talk about. As I was mentioning at the beginning of this conversation, there are a couple of like Web3 marketing podcasts out there, but pretty much everybody dropped after like 10 episodes. And if you're not doing it with passion, and if you're not doing it for the long term, there's no point. Obviously, you can do it just for fun, you can do it just to learn. But what hit me was when I realized that this podcast has more potential than landing me a job. So that was like the moment that really clicked for me. And I was like, maybe there's actually more here. Maybe I should really stick to this because I love doing it. This is the most important thing for me. I'm still passionate about it a year and a half almost later. I'm still motivated to keep building it. And I'm seeing very, very good feedback. And for me, this is the most important thing. So that's what I would suggest. I've also made a course on like teaching people like how to do all of this, teaching them like all the mistakes that I've done. But
Yeah, could you
basically,
like talk a little bit more? Like, what are the key takeaways of somebody, who would, let's say, apply for this course? What would they get out of it for, to become a podcast, successful podcast host like you?
oh yeah, I don't know if I should call myself successful, but on the way there at least.
Uh,
I think so what I'm teaching people is obviously how to start, what kind of gears they need, what kind of software they should use, where they should be spending their money. I have something that I've done, I think for me, that I did not have much budget. And for me, the most important thing was to make sure that I'm doing everything with as little resources as possible. The most important thing that I did was to outsource my editing. And no, I'm not paying 150 euros per episode, as the majority of the people will ask you. Just like as a heads up, if you're like on a small, tight budget, you can still start the podcast. And I'm teaching you how to get your speakers, and I'm telling you like how it works for me, how to work with PR agencies that are pitching you people, how to promote your podcast, which is super, super important because
yeah.
like recording stuff, it's great, but then you do it, how do you grow it? I'm giving you resources of like some of my networks. For example, so there's somebody that I know that I'm part of his network. His name is Eric Melhor. He has a B2B media network of podcasters. So basically, he gets sponsorships and puts them on this podcasters. And right now, for example, there's a sponsor that is like rolling some ads on on the podcast of a bunch of us, because they did a small test in December, they liked it, and right now they want to continue with that, which I think is pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
So even if, for example, I thought I was too small for that, apparently I'm not too small, because I can still land sponsorships. Not like for a lot of money, it doesn't help me like live, but I think it is proof that anything really, it's very encouraging, and it helps me understand, or like motivates me to move forward.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
and
it's a very, like, if today we look at podcast as a, like the idea of being an entrepreneur, real, venture, there's so much you can. When I really like what you said is that, I've been reading, listening to a lot of other podcasts on startups, say that use your resources well. Like if you get, like, let's say a funding of like 50K, don't go get a plush office. If you need it, if you think it'll add to your value, or or your like revenue, then do it. Be smart about your choices. Even like, let's say, going for a lot of these events, don't create a smoke screen. Add value to what you're doing, and build, but build smartly. And I think that's the, and that's a fantastic approach. So how would you look at yourself as an entrepreneur today, as a podcast? Because it has a huge market value. How do you reach out to the audience, or to even speak to other B2B companies? What kind of voice or methodology are you using?
So I wanted to say that based on what you were saying, I was speaking to a lot of women on my podcast exactly about this. I didn't want to make it like a women podcast, but like I wanted to like be able to target different audiences. And one of the things that I was talking to the women in my podcast is that you give a woman 50,000 euros, for example, and they will turn this around like a million times. They would like save every single beat of that budget and make sure it's like spent properly and so on. Give 50,000 euros to a man and they won't know what to do with it, because they want to just splurge. And apparently
Yeah.
like investors are very aware of that as well, even if like there are all these like discrepancies between like investing in like in a woman or a man. But just towards what you were saying, I think this was something very important that I really wanted to get out.
Yeah.
Um, I think it does help being a woman in Web3, or like a woman building this project. And I don't want to admit it, but sometimes like being a woman like closes doors, and sometimes being a woman opens doors.
Yeah.
Um, I think what's really lacking in many situations is the self-confidence to go there with the attitude of a man. And then this is the feedback that I've got from a lot of men as well. So I think like just making sure you go there with an attitude, and show
Yeah.
your numbers, and you're confident in what you're
Yeah.
building and so on.
Yeah.
And just to give an example of that, I thought that was so smart, um, with Shipify, for example, yesterday. So Shipify has a community of about like 3,000 something women. So it's not huge, right? It's big, has women from like 70 countries, but it's not huge. However, it's very important is that it's a very tiny community. It's a community that's super passionate about like the brand and the founder,
Yeah.
and about each other, and about the subject, the industry, and so on. So I re-registered for their 10th cohort, I think, right now. That started this week. And yesterday they were giving away all this like proof of participation, NFTs. And I was like, oh, I just want to mint that. And there's a company, I don't want to say names, but there's a company that is sponsoring this season. And what they did is that like they're gonna have, I think, like 2 sessions about like how to use their wallet, and what integrations they have, and what
Yeah.
features they
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. It's a very
And
common thing now. A lot of people do
yes,
that. Yeah.
yes. But what happens is that instead of like them spending money on user acquisition, they're sponsoring this cohort. There's 700 women, right? So every single person from that cohort is going to open a wallet with them. That's 700 wallets. That's a cost of acquisition of a like very, very small cost of acquisition. So what I'm trying to say is that even if like you're so small, and if you think you're small, you may be actually bigger than you think, and you should go there with confidence. So I think this is the best advice I can give.
Yeah,
Trust
and I
me.
think even in community building, I see now that even when we are onboarding women, it's really people who are passionate about following through on what we're doing. It's really not about the quantity versus the quality, because it affects the way that your community will behave with you and vice versa. There have been other projects where where a lot of upcoming chains have said that, oh, what is the kind of community that you have, and they said, oh, we need like a minimum of 1,000 to 2,000 people. And it made me think that if you have 2,000 people and the activity rate is like less than 2%, what's the point? You might rather have a smaller community with a larger activity participation rate that involves the people, and I think that that's where awareness building, conversations are so important, so you can at least see what's going on within the community, and where like things like panel discussions, a podcast. Definitely a lot of my knowledge about startups, I must tell you, it comes from podcasts, because you can, while working, you can listen to it. There are some very valuable insights, and that's also something I wanted to ask you. When there is a conversation driving, between you and the speaker, how do you identify the key moments where okay, this is going to add value to the podcast, or this is going to, it, right? Like, okay, wow, this is going to be it. Or how do you build those moments, or are they natural? And yeah, and what are the nicest moments that you've had on your show?
I mean, like, I think every episode is special, right? Some are more special than others, but I think they're all special at some level. Um, Something that I do, and I think nobody taught me this, but I found out I think it's very important to make sure that I squeeze the best. I don't know if everything, but the best I can do at that specific moment.
Yeah.
So something that I do, there are two situations. As I told you, one is like when people are being pitched to me, and one is somebody that I know. Sometimes like I know people, we're like we've met at events and so on, but I don't know what I don't know much, or like I don't know all the details of their work. Every single time, absolutely everybody that was on my podcast um, went through a screening process. Absolutely everybody. So I have this like 15 to 30 minutes intro call where I ask them more about like themselves. We get to know each other. We build a bit of banter, right? I think it's very, very important. I want them to remember me. This is also super important because I don't want them to think, oh, I did an interview with somebody, but I can't remember their name. I can't even remember that podcast. I
Yeah.
want them to see me twice, three times to make sure that I can build that like personal relationship with them.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one very
Yeah.
two. In that intro session, I asked them a bunch of stuff. Sometimes they don't tell me much. And sometimes I have to squeeze something from them to make
Yeah.
sure that I have like all the notes that I need to be able to like build a good episode. Of course, my
Mm.
episode is based on like I have a list of questions, I have a structure. I want to make sure that I'm also asking people from my audience to give me questions. Um, and sometimes like it's quite a lot of interest. For example, like one of my episodes got about like 20 something questions. I was like, oh my god, how I'm gonna fill this all of in, because I really wanted to make sure that everything is answered during that
Yeah.
episode. So even if like we went past like those 45 minutes, that's like normally the average, I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure it does provide like a lot of value. So this is one of the ways that I'm trying to squeeze information from them. And sometimes in those intro calls, it will be a bunch of random stuff, which I think is they're so juicy moments, and I'm like, that's exactly what I'm gonna ask you
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if I'm just doing research about them, I would never know, right?
Yeah.
And to give you an example of that, I had a podcast interview with somebody from POAP the other day.
Oh, yes, you were telling me about. Yeah.
Yeah, proof of attendance protocol. They're awesome. They're doing an amazing job. They have an amazing user experience. They also the people use that for Web2 and Web3 as well.
Yeah.
So I was like,
Yeah.
oh, look, I was like, oh, I'm probably gonna ask you some examples of like how POAP was being used. And he's like, yeah, so Porsche is using that. I don't know what NBA is using that. I don't know who else was using that. I'm like, that's what I want to talk about on my
Yeah.
podcast. I don't want to just like blah 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 fluff fluff fluff. So
Yeah.
that's one.
Yeah.
Getting questions from the audience is super important because like I think this drives a bit of conversation, and like most times it's things that I thought about already, but
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, oh, this is actually very interesting. Like
Yeah.
let me try to push that. Um
To add
and
to that, there was this podcast I was listening to. The speaker said that, we're all so interested in understanding what we can deliver, in a conversation, in a product, that the most important insight comes from actually the comment section. And if you can drive the section, whether it's towards positivity, whether it's to trolling, it's still engagement, and you can find what people want. And I think that's a universal thumb rule for anybody trying to build anything, that it's not about what you want to build, and that's what even at Role Model Rebels we keep interacting, saying, what do you want to do, what do you what is it that we can facilitate in making your community stronger. And yeah, that's some great insight, Alexandra.
I just wanted to like add two more things here, if you don't mind. I
Yeah.
wanted to like add the third thing, which is very important, is that sometimes people say something on the podcast, and I'm like, I have an idea. I want to put you on the spot right now. I want to know. With POAP, because it's the last episode that I recorded, I asked them like, hey, do you guys have like most times they're probably the only product in Web3 that's for everyone. That's what
Yeah.
everybody says, and it's not
Yeah.
for everyone. But this is
Yeah.
probably for everyone. And
Yeah.
I asked like, what is the range between men and women using POAP? And I'm like, oh my God. He's like, oh my God, I would love to know this because we actually don't have this data. I'm like, this is something very important. That's
Yeah.
the kind of thing that I
Yeah.
can use um, to promote the episode.
Yeah.
And to what you were, so this would be like the my three holy grails, let's say.
Yeah.
The third is, something else I wanted to add, like based on what you said, is that I think knowing your target audience is such an universal thing, but it's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Like everybody's like, yeah, I should know your audience. I'm like, how do I know my audience? There's like
Yeah.
or like, how do I drive that
Yeah.
conversation to make sure people interact enough for me
Yeah.
to have enough data to draw some conclusions. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's completely, I always, we're all exact, even for us, we're trying to look at ways, not trying to spam people by giving them a survey, because little insights, right? I was listening to this thing where they said the way that people use cream, like women, like do like spot their face, while men just smear it on that. That's such great insight. And I think even for yours, I was listening to the one with the unstoppable domains, and there were so many things that it was more about like understanding the way that you use it. And yes, if you say POAP is like, even when we want to introduce the idea of like Web3 to somebody who's new, POAP is the simplest way,
Simplest way,
yeah,
yes.
but how do you deliver it better to men or women or to even children? That's the key, and yeah, maybe that could be a segment on your on your on your show that, which I'm sure everybody building a product or in a, in a product would want to know. So, in like to know where you are, what are the, like, what have you had any difficult moments on your podcast, while filming or, anything, and how did you overcome that?
I think every episode comes with a challenge, right? The biggest problem I have is that at the beginning of or before the recording of every episode, every single speaker gets an email from me. Hey, these are the questions. This is the link for the recording. This is how you should prepare. This is what you should use. This is the kind of room you should be in. This is the
Yeah,
mic that you should be using. I'm giving you different options. Do not use earpods. What do? They come on both podcasts with their dog barking, wear earpods, with their internet not working. And I'm like, why? I'm putting so much effort into this, right?
yeah,
Uh, so I think this would be one of the most difficult things. And I had to cancel recordings like with somebody 3 times, with somebody 4 times. And we managed to do it after all, but I'm like, you come the third time, still unprepared when I told you so many times. I'm like, why are you doing this to me?
yeah, yeah.
So
And that's something. Okay, in terms of, so how, let's say people don't have access to XYZ mic, what do they do? Can they, just use whatever
yes,
there is? Yeah,
yes, they can use something like this. I even tell them like, hey, this is a normal microphone, works as well. Do
yeah,
not use earpods because they are the worst. You have a lot of like background noise, and like
yeah,
podcasting is the sound is so important. If you don't get
yeah,
it right, nobody's gonna listen to it. So like I want the quality of every episode to be very similar, at least, right? If it's not exactly the same. And also something else I would add is that it happened to me not so many times, because like I do have that intro call, right? And with people, normally I build a bit of banter, and we can go back and forth. But there are people that they say something, and I want to continue the conversation, and I give my opinion about like what they said, and many times they could continue the conversation, and that helps me make it
yeah,
not look like an interview, is like
mm,
questioning. But sometimes
yeah,
people, they're like, and then I need to pick it up really fast.
yeah,
So like,
yeah,
don't
yeah,
leave, I don't leave a lot of space in between. I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I can't, if you don't want to continue the conversation, or if you don't want to give your opinion on that and so on,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it is what it is, but
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it does put a bit of pressure on
yeah,
me. But I think
yeah.
like with time, you just learn how to pick it up. So
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid question as a podcast host, because there might be some people who might have fantastic stories but might not be the conversationalist, or might not have the ability to take something through, and then how do you build that momentum, or bring it out in them? But you're doing a fantastic job. What are the things that you're hoping to build, through your podcast now in the next few years to come? And have you actually, there's this one question which I wanted to ask you, through from when you started to now, have you seen, what are the kind of shifts that you've seen within the industry? Because in the beginning, I'm sure you've been talking about something. Is that conversation still carrying through, or has the momentum changed now that AI has become so prevalent in the emerging tech? What are your thoughts about it?
I think like I would add here maybe like 3 things. The first thing is that for me, it was very important to make sure that I stick to Web3 marketing. I don't want to go into gaming. I don't want to go into just talking about NFTs. I don't want to keep talking about AI, even if like I could have an episode or two about AI, but I don't want to keep talking about stuff that I'm not super passionate about. I could
Yeah.
do an episode. I've done episodes, for example, on
Yeah.
industrial metaverse,
Yeah.
which is like, what is that? But that episode, I think, is one of the most digestible I have ever had because it explains so easily what it is and how it works in real life. And you're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, it does make so much sense.
Yeah.
But except for that, I don't want to dilute
Yeah.
because then it drops my motivation. And for me, the most important, I'm doing this for free, right? I
Yeah.
want to make sure that I continue building that for something that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
That's one. I think the conversation, maybe it's changed a bit, and I think it will change in terms of seeing more case studies, seeing more numbers and bringing bigger people on the pod. I think I've always liked the underdogs. I think it's not maybe fair to say underdogs for some of the speakers, but I'm calling them underdogs because they don't work for Binance, for example, which is super well known.
Yeah.
And they don't really or they don't have like big audiences. So that's the
Yeah.
reason why I'm calling them underdogs, not because
Yeah.
of the quality of like
Yeah.
their
Obviously. Yeah. Yeah.
um so I think that's something that I'm looking to focus a lot more and to teach people. Obviously, trying to take into consideration like who are my listeners. Very, very important. Um, and when it comes to what's next for me and this community, I've been shying away from a lot of stuff. For example, I've been shying away from building newsletters, from getting a website, from like writing long form content. I was like, nobody's gonna read that. It does help with indexation though, like longer for form contact, having a website. So that's what I'm working on right now. So
Yeah.
my website is probably gonna be out in like 2 weeks. I'm going to put everything there, like the course, the services, the podcast. I want to make
Yeah.
sure everything is under one
Yeah.
umbrella.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know, but now I'm under out of ordinary brand, which kind of puts all my services and all everything that I do
Yeah.
under this thing, which
Yeah.
something I did not think until recently, but it is what it is. And something that I think is very, very important for me is that there are two things. One is that I'm planning to build a community. So even if like I already have a community, but like I don't know exactly who are these people unless I interact with them on Twitter or LinkedIn. So what I'm
Yeah.
planning to do is that I'm planning to do a token gated community of people like getting on probably on Telegram to figure out to first of all give them access to like exclusive deals. If I, for example, like I partner up, I'm gonna have like 2 tickets to give away for my community for ETH Bucharest happening in 2 weeks, for example. I want to make sure that they are the first people that will be getting those
Yeah.
deals, and everything else that I can do exclusive for them, recommendations, peer-to-peer work, and so on. I want to build that community. That would be
Yeah.
very, very important for me. And second thing would be to integrate as many Web3 tools as possible. So minting episodes, making them collectibles, trying to build. I have a million ideas about like how I can integrate like different types of brands with my
Yeah.
podcast and to do some sort of like small campaigns and so on.
Yeah,
So
and
I think,
collaboration is the thing, because there's so much happening out there. Even we're looking at content collaboration, and we've met somebody who said that okay, yeah, we have people who could do this. We personally don't want to do this or take this on board, but we're happy to collaborate with you. And I think collaborations is a great message, even amongst us, that if we can do something for you and vice versa, not why not? Because this is part of decentralization, right? Like not holding everything in your own, ecosystem. And yeah, and that's fabulous news. And wish you all the best.
thank you. I think like something that any Web3, Web2 community or Web2 company or so on there are a bunch of lessons that can be learned from Web3. And I think
Yeah.
one of the most important things, they're like community and partnerships, because
Yeah.
all the growth thrives through that.
Yeah.
So I think, as you were saying, I think that's the only way moving forward.
Yeah. 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 Thank you so much, Alexandra. This was fantastic. I knew that, it would be great to be in conversation with you, and we would have such a thoughtful, funny, and also learning, conversation between us. So let's say if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that? You want to like just give out your details?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not super active lately, but I'm gonna go back to that promise. But I do reply to pretty much all the all the messages that I'm getting on LinkedIn. Alexandra Nicorici. Maybe you can leave like
Yeah.
my full name, because sometimes it's hard to spell, let's say.
Yes.
Um, then I'm Frogule, Telegram, Twitter, I think Farcaster as well, if anybody's using
Yeah.
Farcaster. Lance as well, also Frogule. So I'm going around with this nickname. And obviously you can find, if you find me on Twitter, you can also find Out of Ordinary podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much anywhere, on Twitter as well. So if anybody's listening, please slide into my DMs and let me know what you think, if you have any more ideas.
Definitely. Okay, let me stop this. Okay.